Welcome. At this festive season of the year, when we are reminded to be generous to the homeless, the sick, the hungry, it's easy to overlook one group which suffers in the shadows. Worldwide, nearly 36 million are trapped in slavery, according to the human rights group Walk Free. Where are these slaves, and why don't governments do more to free them? We'll get answers in a moment. Also on the program, our Public Intellectual segment, new research that reveals that despite rising incomes for some minority families, the newly diverse suburbs are like the old cities, segregated and unequal. Then the medical wisdom of crowds. When your doctor is stumped, an online platform lets you bid for a diagnosis. And towards the end of the hour, see the very best infographics of the year. First though, modern-day slavery. Pope Francis is urging us to make it a priority. And one organization has been trying to awaken the world to it. Starting last year, the Australian human rights group, the Walk Free Foundation, began publishing the Slavery Index. The newly updated figures are shocking. 35.8 million in some form of servitude worldwide. With us via Skype from Washington, D.C., the Walk Free Foundation's Executive Director of Global Research, Fiona David. Hello from New York. Welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
There's a specific definition that you use of modern-day slavery. Can you tell us what it is?
Certainly. We're not talking about situations where people just have a bad job. We're talking about very serious criminal situations where it really is appropriate to use the word slavery. For the Global Slavery Index, we talk about modern slavery as any situation where one person deliberately takes away another person's liberty, whether that's, using threats or force or violence, so that they can exploit the other person.
And are there particular types? Because even within that, before we look country to country and see which are the countries with the most slavery in the world today, there are several types of slavery that you document, correct?
Correct. Offenders worldwide continue to be very opportunistic and very resilient in finding new ways to offend. So we see in 2014 everything from debt bondage situations in South Asia to even what you might call very traditional forms of chattel slavery in parts of West Africa, and then perhaps the more modern forms of what some people might call human trafficking, involving people moving from one country to another, where they're then exploited through some sort of forced labour.
All right, we're going to put up a list, and as we look at particular countries, we'll hear more about the kinds of slavery and the types of conditions that people are living in. But what this shows us, folks, is the percentage of the population in each country that lives in some form of slavery. So you see the nation of Mauritania tops the list with 4% of its population considered by Walk Free to be enslaved. Then Uzbekistan, right behind, 3.97% of the population. Then it drops down to Haiti at 2.3%, Qatar 1.3%, India 1.1%, Pakistan 1.1%, and on down from there. So let's talk about Mauritania, since it's the #1 country and the only one at a full 4% of slavery. What kinds of slavery do they have primarily in Mauritania?
Mauritania in West Africa is one of the few countries in the world where we continue to see what you might consider to be very old-fashioned traditional forms of slavery, of literally people living in master-slave relationships, hereditary slavery where the children of slaves are effectively passed on to the master of the household. So that's the kind of situation we see in Mauritania. It's very unique, really, and specific to this part of West Africa.
And how about Uzbekistan, which is #2 and has almost the same percentage of their people living in slavery? It's a very different part of the world. It's Eastern Europe or Central Asia. What's happening in Uzbekistan?
That's a very interesting question. Uzbekistan is completely different, as you have identified, to Mauritania. The situation in Uzbekistan is that the government subjects its population to forced labour in the cotton fields, so through the cotton picking, cotton harvesting, weeding throughout the year. So for a period of time, practically the entire population of Uzbekistan is put to work by the government picking cotton.
Wow. And you consider that slavery?
We consider it slavery when it involves a situation that somebody has no choice but to remain in it. They can't leave. This is not a case of I am required to pay my taxes. This is a situation of if I don't do what the government is asking me, I will be subjected to some sort of harm.
Well, those were so different from each other, the Mauritania story and the Uzbekistan story. Let's continue to go down the list. And the third one is right in our hemisphere, Haiti, with 2% of the population in slavery. What's the nature of slavery in Haiti?
Once again, a very different set of situations in Haiti. Culturally, there's a long tradition of children from fairly impoverished families sending children from fairly impoverished families off to live in the cities or in the larger villages and towns with, relatively wealthier relatives. Now, of course, in some situations, this is a form of social protection. It means kids get to grow up in a household with more money than their own, with potentially more access to education, better healthcare, better food. But unfortunately, what we see is something that in Haiti has its own name. It's called the Restovac system, where children are, they're not given access to education, they're not fed properly, they're not treated properly, they're effectively unpaid domestic servants, and it's very prevalent in Mauritania, unfortunately.
In Mauritania as well as Haiti? Is that what you're telling us?
I'm sorry.
In Haiti, that's very
Haiti.
prevalent, Haiti. Well, let's continue down the list because we get yet another region of the world. It's interesting that the top cluster of the nations with the most slaves are not all together on the map. They're from all over the place. So we've done Mauritania, Uzbekistan, Haiti, and now we go to the Arab world, Qatar, and after that it's going to be India and Pakistan. But what about Qatar?
Qatar is again quite a different situation, where what we see in Qatar is that men and women are travelling predominantly from South Asia, but also from the Philippines. So we're talking men and women from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, but also increasingly Ethiopia and the Philippines, travelling to Qatar both to work as domestic work in private households, which is what the women do. For men, what we see is there's a population of close to 5 million migrant workers working on the booming construction industry in Qatar, which of course is related to the construction of stadiums and infrastructure for the Soccer World Cup.
The Soccer World Cup, building that stadium.
And the support, of course, it's a number of stadiums, it's roads, it's railways. There's a whole system of infrastructure across the country that's being built.
Right.
And what we're seeing is migrant workers going over there. They know they're going to Qatar. They want to go there. Sometimes they're even paying to go there. But once they're there, they have their passports taken away from them. They find situations very different to what they signed up for, and they're living in labour camps that are really horrendous. And
it's so bad that even ESPN has done a documentary on slave conditions among the workers building the World Cup facilities in Qatar. So this isn't just your group as a human rights group, even ESPN is on this. Let's go down the list. India, one of the world's most populous nations, and Pakistan at about 1.1% of their populations in each case in slavery. But we think of India and Pakistan as very different countries. They're enemies. One is primarily Hindu, one is primarily Muslim. Is the nature of slavery in India and Pakistan roughly the same or quite different?
There are some similarities across several of the countries in South Asia for some of the practices that we see. In India and in Pakistan, it's very not common, but it is unfortunately something you come across, that people are held in situations of debt bondage, where, for example, the brick kiln owner lends money to the workers so that they can come and work in the brick kiln, but they're lending the money at such a rate that the person can never effectively repay it, and then the debt is then handed on to their children and their children's children. So we see this situation happening in India, but also in Pakistan and in other countries such as Nepal. So in addition to debt bondage, we also see situations of forced marriage. Unfortunately, forced marriage is a problem in many countries around the world, including Australia and the United States. But certainly in India and Pakistan, forced marriage is a real issue.
Now, we have put up a different slide which shows, instead of the percentage of the population in slavery, the sheer numbers. And this is, of course, going to change the order of things with India at the top, because India is a country of 1 billion people. So for anybody watching thinking, well, 1% of the population in slavery, that's bad, but it's not that bad. Well, take a look at that number. It's 14 million human beings in slavery in India alone, isn't it?
It really is an extraordinary finding, isn't it? What I think is really important is to bear in mind just the enormity of the challenge that really populous countries, including India, are facing. With that population of billions of people, as you have said, even 1% of the population is just millions of people, 14 million people in India.
By the way, on the percentages, the number, the country with the biggest percentage of its population living in slavery, Mauritania, has 4%, according to your statistics. I was just looking up, before we went on the air, the U.S. Census from the year 1800, just to see what it was at the height of slavery in this country, which is the slavery that most people here probably think of. And it looked like it was about 15%, a little more than 15% of the United States. So that's just, it's a number that we never hear. What percentage of the actual American population at the height of slavery was actually in slavery? And I don't know if this is the same number that you use historically, but that's a remarkably high number for any nation, especially considering that the worst of the worst today has 4%. We had 15% of the people in this country enslaved in 1800.
Look, I think it's a really relevant part of the conversation is, all of these practices have a historical context, and the transatlantic slave trade to the United States is, only, some of it's only less than 150 years old. So it's really something that I think we have to be mindful when we're using terminology like slavery, to be very sensitive to that history, but also to realise where these practices come from. They do have a context, they do have a history.
And how about the United States today? There is some slavery in the United States today. It's pretty near the bottom of the list of countries, but almost all the European countries are better than us, meaning they have less slavery. There's a little bit of slavery in the United States today. What do you document in the US in terms of slavery in 2014?
Our estimate for the United States is that some 60,000 people are in some form of modern-day slavery today. Now, of course, that is a very large number of people, and that's very concerning. What I think is heartening is that the United States government actually has a very, one of the more robust, complete responses to this issue out of all the countries we looked at globally. So when we shifted focus from looking at how big is the problem, and we started thinking about how strong are government responses, how complete are they, the United States is actually in the top 3.
And let me stop you there for a second, because people can see that in this graphic. The best country for fighting its domestic slavery is the Netherlands, followed by Sweden, followed by the United States. So in the top 3, as you say. And as you look across the screen, you can see the categories by which our guest group ranks the quality of fighting slavery. Survivors are supported, criminal justice, coordination and accountability, attitudes, social systems and institutions, business and government. So the United States does what well in this respect?
The United States is one of only a very small number of countries, one of only 3, that has really seriously taken steps to bring business to the table on this issue. I think when people think about modern slavery or human trafficking, we all think about, police, law enforcement, prosecuting criminals, which is definitely part of the response. But there's also a response that governments need to take around business. What are the T-shirts that businesses are buying and importing to the United States? Where is the fish coming from that goes onto American dinner plates? Where is the palm oil coming from, and what sort of forced labour is in the supply chain of that company? So the United States is one of only 3 governments to have taken very serious steps to make corporates start looking at this issue as part of the larger contribution to ending modern slavery.
And so this brings us to kind of where I started, which is that Pope Francis has spoken out about this and urged the world to make it a priority. And since he's a critic of capitalism sometimes, he put consumerism as a moral choice into this conversation, into the Pope's own language, that when you buy something, it's not just a transaction for a product, it's a moral choice. So it sounds like Pope Francis wants every Catholic in the world, and by extension everybody in the world, to think about the origins of the products we buy and whether they come directly or indirectly from slaves, yes?
Absolutely. I think it's a very powerful, very important message. As consumers, if we were honestly able to know where did the cotton come from in my clothing, who stitched my clothing, where is my food coming from, where are the tomatoes grown from, what were the labour conditions, I think we would be able to make first of all, we'd be able to make very informed choices, and I think we would see consumers making very different choices about what they buy and what they don't buy. So Pope Francis is both calling for a focus on this issue, but I think as a community, we need businesses to help us have the information to make those choices.
How do we know?
We need transparency from businesses. We need to put systems in place so that businesses are increasingly held accountable for what they're doing or not doing on this issue. And again, the good news from the United States is that California, one of the largest economies in the world, has put in place what's called transparency supply legislation. So every company over a certain size doing business in California has to put a statement on its website about what it's doing about modern slavery in its supply chain. And we think, look, that's not a perfect step, but it's a first step towards giving consumers more information about, is their favourite shoe shop doing something about this issue and taking it seriously, or are they just ignoring treatment of workers?
36 million human beings on the planet today in slavery, according to the group Walk Free. We've been speaking to the executive director of Walk Free. Disturbing, but so informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Time for Public Intellectual, where we look at new research with the power to change minds and public policy. A new study shows that as the suburbs have gotten diverse like the cities, they have remained segregated and unequal, even for those with rising incomes. Moving on up is often just moving on. The study is part of Project 2010 from the Russell Sage Foundation and Brown University. Its author is Brown sociology professor John Logan, and he joins us via Skype from Rhode Island. Welcome to the program.
Hi, nice to be here.
What were you trying to find out with your study?
The big question is whether there's been any change in the nature of the color line in terms of where people live, blacks and whites, around the country, and whether it's any different in the suburbs than in the cities.
Well, I want to put up one graphic right away that reflects some of your data and shows how demographics have changed in the suburb. Now, viewers, watch this, take a close look, because the left circle, pie chart, has 1980 population breakdowns for cities. Then the one to the right has 2010 population breakdowns by race for the suburbs. So these are 30 years apart, and I guess what we're looking at is 30 years after 1980, the suburbs now look like what cities looked like 30 years ago in terms of racial makeup. Is that the point?
That's right, and it's a surprise because we think of the history of central cities as being quite diverse and having very large minority populations. And we never thought the suburbs would be like that, but there they are.
And the cities, of course, at least New York City, which is the one that I know the best, is so much more diverse than that 1980 pie chart would indicate. We have about a quarter of the population Black, a quarter of the population Hispanic, I think maybe about 15% Asian now. So there's no majority group in New York City, probably in a lot of cities, and that's what we would see today, correct?
That's right. That's what we see in New York, but then there are some suburbs that are quite different from this pie chart too. At the extremes, you have areas around Los Angeles where the suburbs are extremely Hispanic and Asian, not so Black, but not nearly 2/3 white.
So do we learn from this that Black and Latino and Asian people are doing better than they were in 1980 because there's a larger concentration in the suburbs than there used to be? You're laughing.
Yeah, no, that's the question. Moving on up, moving on out, and the answer is mixed. And so I want to be clear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. The suburbs are actually less segregated for all groups than the central cities are today, and suburbs are slowly becoming less segregated between Blacks and whites. So there is some progress. In addition, the average Black person or Hispanic, just like the average white who lives in suburbs, lives in a community with more resources, lower crime rate, better environment than the average person living in central cities. So there is something to the idea that the suburban environment has a lot to offer, and I don't want to deny that. On the other hand, what it's offering to Blacks and whites is quite different. That's the negative side of the story, that we see a lot of the same kinds of inequalities in the suburbs that we're familiar with in cities.
So, for example, we're going to put up another graphic from your report, and what we see here is a comparison of Black, white, Hispanic, and Asian groups of the same income brackets by exposure to poverty. Now, this isn't going to be as clear a graphic to most of the viewers as the other one was, so explain these different lines, would you?
Yes. What I've done is I'm doing this, first of all, because the average viewer probably would say, well, of course, Blacks and Hispanics don't live in the same kinds of suburban neighborhoods as whites do because they don't earn as much. And the fact is they don't. It's probably, they earn about 65% as much. So we'd expect to find them in different kinds of neighborhoods. But to further test that, what I did is I divided up everybody into three categories of income. The lower income is people making less than $40,000, and the top bracket, affluent, is people making more than $75,000. So this graph shows for Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, or whites, if you're in that income bracket, what's the poverty rate of your neighbors in the census tract where you live? And the answer is that Asians and whites at all income levels live in less poor neighborhoods than Hispanics and Blacks at all income levels. And in fact, if you look closely, you'll see that the lowest income whites, that is earning less than $40,000, live in less poor neighborhoods than Blacks who are earning over $75,000 or Hispanics earning over $75,000.
Wait,
And this really
how could that be?
contradicts
Because isn't the income the definition of poverty? So how could a white person making $40,000, if they're living among others making $40,000, be living in a higher poverty area than a Black or Latino person making 75? Explain it.
Well, of course, there's a lot of variation in every neighborhood, ranging from people who are not making much at all to people who are doing pretty well. So the question is, what is the average among your neighbors? And if you are a relatively low income person, but you have the good luck to be able to move into a pretty good neighborhood, then quite possibly your neighborhood will be less poor than you, in fact. And conversely, for Hispanics or Blacks, if you've got a good income, but you have the bad luck for some reason to get steered into or end up in a worse neighborhood, well, there you are. So that's really the point, is that there is a lot of differences in the choices available to blacks or Hispanics compared to whites and Asians in the kind of neighborhood that is open to them, and it's not based on their income.
So is the bottom line that the move to the suburbs for a better life for your children, which is most often the reason, I think, doesn't work for Black and Latino Americans the way it does for whites? Or is it more complicated than that?
It doesn't work as much. It works some, but it doesn't work nearly as much. And that's the kicker here. This is why separate, by which I'm referring to the degree of segregation among these groups in different neighborhoods, translates into unequal, which is separate and unequal is something we're pretty familiar with in cities. There we see it again in the suburbs. That's the problem.
Do you recommend any policy changes?
Well, certainly do. I mean, one important change would be to put some constraints on discrimination in the housing market. At the moment, it's illegal to discriminate. It's illegal for a landlord to tell a different story to Hispanics or blacks than to whites about what's available or what it costs or what the deposit is. And it's illegal for a real estate agent to steer blacks to less desirable communities than they show their white clients. So it's illegal. But being against the law doesn't mean it's ever prosecuted. And I don't know of any case, in fact, where the public prosecutors, the district attorneys, have brought cases on this problem. It's left entirely to individual people who think maybe they had a problem and somebody treated them unfairly to go hire a lawyer, collect the evidence, and convince a judge. And it happens, but that's not the way we enforce most laws. So I think the first step would definitely be to take discrimination seriously, not just say, oh, we passed a law in 1968, so it must be gone.
Well, with Ferguson in the news and everything not being hunky-dory for Black and Latino people who move out of the city into the suburbs in a law enforcement respect, now we learn more with respect to housing and poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some medical conditions are so difficult to diagnose, so mysterious, that second opinions from specialists don't bring answers or relief. But at a web platform called CrowdMed, people who are suffering can now reach far and wide for answers. You post your symptoms and you bid for medical detectives to come up with a diagnosis. How exactly does this work, and what does it cost? Joining us, the founder of CrowdMed, Jared Heyman. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be here.
Explain the very basics here, because I'm sure people heard that introduction and they thought, what? What? We put this out on the web and somebody who's never examined me can come up with a diagnosis?
So we have a unique perspective on medical diagnosis and treatment. The traditional medical system is based on this concept of an individual specialist, one person looking at your case and examining you, the patient, and your case, working all on his or her own, and trying to take that individual expert approach to diagnosing or hopefully curing your disease. We have a much different philosophy, where we believe in the wisdom of crowds. And we believe that large groups of people are better equipped and collectively smarter, if you will, than even the smartest individual doctor in the world. So what we do is, if you're a patient and you have an unsolved medical mystery, you can submit your case on our website. You answer a brief patient questionnaire. You can upload any medical records or diagnostic test results, imaging test results, all completely anonymous. And we post your case on our website and collect the opinions of often dozens of medical experts from around the world who collectively try to give you diagnostic or solution suggestions that bring you closer to a cure.
And what's the bidding aspect of this?
So our site is partially a marketplace where patients can offer what we call medical detective compensation. It's a cash offer that is distributed to the people who do the best job solving your case. Offering this is optional. A lot of our patients submit their case for free, or they don't offer any medical detective compensation, and their cases also get plenty of attention from our community. Who ask you to imagine, if you offer $1,000 or more, or provide a compelling compensation offer, you do get more attention from our community than someone who hasn't offered any type of incentive or reward.
Because you distribute that money among the people who post responses?
It's all based upon performance. So you don't get any piece of that money just for participating. We have an entirely performance-based reward system. However, you can get a piece of that if you essentially are helpful to the case and help bring the patient closer to a correct diagnosis or cure.
Who judges that?
The patient themselves. So the way the reward is allocated, first of all, the patient tells us whether they found the results helpful. And assuming they do, then there's 3 ways that they can reward the detectives. Up to 50% of their reward is what we call a discretionary reward allocation, where they just choose the people who they subjectively found to be most helpful during the case. The other way that a medical detective can win compensation is by suggesting what either turned out to be the best diagnosis or the best solution in the case, or by allocating points or supporting someone else's suggestion that turned out to be the best.
But because you have bids, if I'm Michael Bloomberg with a mysterious stomach ailment, I'm more likely to get more people on my case than if I'm me with a mysterious stomach ailment.
Well, assuming Michael Bloomberg offers a high cash reward, which I'm sure he's in a position to do, then yes, his case probably would get more attention. But the attention of our medical detective community is a scarce resource, and we have to have some way of allocating it to the patients, and we figure that those patients who are willing to offer more are probably in greater need.
So, have you cured anybody?
We're very proud of our success statistics. So we've had over 500 cases that have been resolved on the site since we launched about 1.5 years ago. 60% of those patients tell us that CrowdMed successfully brought them closer to either a correct diagnosis or cure. So we have literally hundreds of success cases. And these days, every week, I get an email or a letter from a patient who either saved their life or brought them answers that the medical establishment hadn't, and they're very grateful. So it's very rewarding.
Are there types of mysterious illnesses that tend to be the most prevalent? Are they, I'm thinking digestive, because people tend to present with, I don't know what's wrong, is it irritable this or what, but maybe it's something else. What is the most common?
Well, the one commonality amongst our cases is there's no common answer. We see a very long-tailed distribution in terms of the types of diagnoses that our patients end up having. No single diagnosis is more than 2% of the total. And most diagnoses we've only seen once or twice in the entire history of the website. So these are patients that have very rare or difficult to diagnose conditions. If they had something common, they probably would have been diagnosed through the traditional medical system. So to give you an idea of how complicated these cases are, our average patient has been sick for 8 years. They've seen 8 doctors, and they've already incurred over $50,000 in medical expenses before they even submit their case on our site. So these are not colds and flus or even simple GI issues. These are complicated and chronic conditions.
So could this change the medical system overall, besides being, you know, a particularly crowdsourced service for a relative few individuals? Do you think this could change the nature of medicine?
We think it can have a pretty big impact on the entire medical industry. So to give you an idea of how important this problem is, in the US, about 5% of patients account for over 50% of the country's total healthcare costs. Now, some of these patients we can't help. They have end-of-life issues, or the system already knows what's wrong with them, but the treatment's very expensive. But we estimate about half of these patients we can help. So even though our target population is only about 2.5% of the population, that 2.5% represents a quarter of the country's total healthcare costs. So if we can shorten the duration of their illness and bring them to a correct diagnosis or cure much more quickly than what would happen if they continued bouncing through the medical system, we think we could actually take a pretty sizable chunk out of the country's total healthcare expenditures.
I gather you're not a doctor, so how'd you get into this?
I'm not a doctor. I'm a technology entrepreneur, and my previous company is an online survey firm called InfoServe, still exists today. And at InfoServe, I learned a lot about the wisdom of crowds. This notion that large groups of people can collectively be very intelligent as long as there's the right mechanism in place to aggregate their collective intelligence. And I developed a product over there called Intengo that still exists today as well. And that is a crowdsourcing platform using a similar prediction market mechanism to what CrowdMed uses, but to answer questions of interest to market researchers. So over the years I spent at InfoServe and developing Intengo, I really learned about crowd wisdom and how best to harness it. So I had the knowledge through there. But what really inspired me to take on this particular mission and to apply this to medicine is my little sister spent 3 years with a very difficult, chronic, undiagnosed medical condition. And over that 3-year period, I saw her bounce from doctor to doctor. In total, she saw almost 24 different specialists. She had terrible symptoms, depression, anxiety, weight gain. At some points, she even started to have suicidal thoughts. So it was a really life-threatening condition. Fortunately, she was eventually diagnosed by a top-notch interdisciplinary team of physicians at the NIH Clinical Center.
Not through crowdsourcing, though.
Well, in a way it was. This is before CrowdMed existed. But I think it's no coincidence that it was an interdisciplinary team of physicians working together at the NIH in Bethesda. I think there's no coincidence that's how she got diagnosed and not by continuing to just bounce from specialist to specialist. So in a way, her diagnosis was crowdsourced. But she was very fortunate to get into this program at the NIH. Most people don't have that luxury. So I wanted to create a platform where people like my sister who don't have the resources to go to the NIH or perhaps the Mayo Clinic. Maybe they live in a country where those resources aren't available. Maybe they live here in the US but just don't have the financial resources. I wanted to give them a way to tap into the wisdom of crowds and get a cure like my sister did.
And who are the people who tend to participate? You said they tend to be medical professionals. It sounds like they don't get paid that much or that often for doing this medical detective work. So are these just Good Samaritan doctors doing this as a hobby, or who's your crowd?
Sure. Well, it's safe to say that no one participates on CrowdMed for the financial rewards. Although that is a factor, when we ask detectives what motivates them, usually they mention money about 4th or 5th on their lists, and nobody's making a livable wage solving cases on our site, even if you lived in a country with a very low cost of living. So they're not professionals, or not professional case solvers on our site, let's say. That being said, about 2/3 of them do work in or study medicine. So these are people active in medicine, most commonly doctors, nurses, med students. We see nurse practitioners, different types of allied health professionals, but 2/3 of them have a medical background. The other 1/3 are often other patients who maybe had a particular disease themselves, and they might know more about that disease than even the majority of doctors out there. And we find that that mix between the medical professionals and the patients really works quite well and tends to produce very good answers for our patients.
You said you're a tech entrepreneur. Is this a business or is this a nonprofit?
I did consider a nonprofit structure for this, but I decided to go the for-profit route. So we are a venture-backed Silicon Valley startup. We're backed by $2.4 million from a wide range of top-tier Silicon Valley VC firms, and plus some angel investors. One of them is the actor Patrick Dempsey, who a lot of people know, and some other prominent folks. So we are for-profit, but we still have a very social mission, and we really do want to change the world, if you will.
How do you make money?
So currently, our sole source of revenue is our patients. So I mentioned that patients can submit their case free of charge, and a lot of them do. We also have paid packages that begin at $99 and go up to $499. And those packages include a longer case duration, the ability to continue chatting with medical detectives post-case. The $299 and $499 package also include $200 and $300 in medical detective compensation included in the package. So of course, the folks who opt for that package, they get a lot more attention from the medical detective community.
How about privacy? Everybody's so concerned with medical privacy. There's the HIPAA law and scams, because you don't know who these crowdsourced people are, who the medical detectives are, for the most part, right, if you are the patient. So how do you protect against, abuse of your information, such private information, if you're a long-suffering person with a very difficult condition? And what about scammers?
Well, we take privacy very seriously on the site. So first of all, we never say the name of the patient or any personally identifiable information whatsoever. So each patient is known by their pseudonym, a name they make up. It can be their real first name if they choose, or very often it's a fake name that they just make up.
And you as the broker are sort of the go-between. Exactly.
So we act as that firewall protecting their privacy. On the back end, of course, internally, we have their email address and we have to have a way of contacting them, but we never divulge their personal information on the case. And we encourage them, if they upload any medical records or anything that might have their name on it, that they black out or remove any personally identifiable information. We want them to be completely anonymous. Obviously, the medical detectives need certain demographic information like their age and their gender, ethnicity, because a lot of diseases are genetic in nature, but nothing that would uniquely identify who they are.
And is scamming not a problem because the patient, him or herself, rates whether they've gotten a successful diagnosis or progress toward a cure?
That's right. We think it's very difficult to game our system. We've tried to think through all the ways that someone might try, and so far we haven't seen any evidence of any kind of gaming behavior or people trying to win money by not actually adding value. Because at the end of the day, you can only make money on our site by providing true value to the patient, as determined by the patient.
Which does make me wonder, though, is there such a thing as an informational placebo effect?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, somebody could feel better, think they're better, maybe actually be better by getting information that they think is right, whether it's technically right or not.
Well, I would say that part of the value we provide is giving patients information, and even the 40% of our patients that tell us that we did not bring them closer to a correct diagnosis or cure, many of them are still quite satisfied, just because they got some information that they found of value. So I think the fact that we provide people that really listen and really care, often dozens of them, whereas in the medical system, a patient might have 10 minutes to speak with their doctor and that's all. That is, I think, a value. So if it's a placebo, I think it's a good placebo.
All right, the wisdom of the crowd in medicine. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Who makes the highest salary on your state's payroll? That and other facts visualized from the best infographics of the year after this. With the advent of computers and the web, our world has become awash in data about ourselves and the world around us. So much so that entirely new jobs like data miner and data journalist have been invented to explore it all. Technology has also made it easier to create visual images from data. Increasingly, we communicate visually. Today, we even have infographics about infographics, which brings us to our next guest. For the second year in a row, science journalist Gareth Cook has published his selection of the year's best American infographics. In 2005, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his explanatory journalism on the science and ethics surrounding stem cell research, something he could never have done without the power of illustration. Gareth Cook joins us via Skype from Boston. Welcome and congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And let's dive right in and show people an example. And we have a lot of these that we'll go through from your collection. And they can be fun. This is the Midwest by consensus. What are we looking at here?
So what you're looking at here is the answer to the question, what is the Midwest? Where is it exactly? And the way they chose to answer this is they collected about 100 maps and basically piled them right on top of each other. So the places that are darker are the places where everyone agrees is the Midwest. So Michigan, that's pretty much the Midwest, but Texas, not so much. What I love about this is it captures a sense of the fuzzy boundary, that we're not exactly sure where the Midwest, we have a sense for where it is, but we can't be positive where it is. And I think that this is something that would be very difficult to do without visualization like this.
The funniest parts of this to me are that Virginia seems to come up fairly strongly as the Midwest for some people, and you've got a good section of Canada in that map.
Well, some people in the Midwest, they have big hearts. They want everyone to be a part of the Midwest.
That's right, big hearts and big open spaces. All right, let's go to another one. And here we learn that I see that men seem to like this cooking infographic. Chelsea's kale salad and comfort polenta. What are we looking at, and why do you find a gender attraction?
Well, men like it, but so does my 8-year-old son. I mean, I think that there's something about this that is very direct. I find when I'm cooking, I often go back and forth trying to find my place in the recipe, and it can be kind of frustrating. But something about this is just very elegant and appealing. And I think this speaks to the ability that infographics have to speak in a more direct, clear voice sometimes. And I love how you can just sort of see how the whole thing comes together. You can see all the ingredients. You can see where you are in the process. So that's another thing that good infographics
so in other
do.
Words,
they just give you this sense of where you are, yeah.
This is just another way to create a cookbook, is what you're saying, right?
It's a recipe without all those annoying words.
All right,
So
yes.
you can
And
make,
there's
my son made mashed potatoes this way. He was very excited about it.
And there on the left, Travis's mushroom rigatoni. I'd like to try some of that right now in the comfort polenta.
Yes.
All right, more seriously, let us go on to your infographic that shows the highest paid public employee in each state. And I had a feeling it would come out something like this before I actually saw the map, but a lot of people are going to be shocked. Put some words to this.
So this is, there's a few things that are interesting about this. First of all, when I first saw this, I found it shocking, and maybe at a certain level not shocking. It's also, it shows a piece of info. It zeroes in on one piece of information, and using that piece of information, I think, says something about the values we have as a society. That the highest paid public employee in most states is the football coach.
That is the football coach, or in some cases the basketball coach at the flagship state university. That's why this is a public employees map, right?
Exactly, that's right. And I think a friend of mine, when he saw this, said that the Northeast should secede. Because if you look up there in the Northeast, there's a lot of exceptions up there where we don't have the coach as the highest paid public employee.
Oh yeah, so for New York, it's actually a little hard to read on my copy. It's med school something?
Yep, that's right.
A med school department chair, I see, at one of the state universities, I guess. And I don't see the governor as the highest paid public employee in any of these states, do I?
I don't think you do. I don't think people have the same passion for the governor that they do for a winning football team.
The Dakotas, North and South, also have med school dean in each case.
Yeah.
Interesting. College president next door there in Montana. So that's another comparison worth making here. The basketball or football coach gets paid more than the president of the same university.
Exactly, and that speaks to obviously a power imbalance that we've seen play out in the news. Another thing that I think is interesting about this is it's an example of an infographic being used almost as an op-ed. I mean, this is everything in there is true, but obviously the person did it with a particular point of view. They're trying to make a point and trying to make a argument about how we spend our public resources.
And yet nobody had to say, I believe, or isn't this outrageous, in order to make the point.
Exactly, so the argument's kind of hidden in a way, yeah.
As we look at some examples from the Best American Infographics 2014, let's go on to another one that our guest has selected for the book, and this is called The Flow of Tobacco. How come?
So this is interesting. This sort of shows really the world market for tobacco, and you can see visually what a central role the United States plays in this. You can see the sort of products coming here and leaving around the world. It's sort of, to me, a little bit reminiscent of the slave trade, in that it's sort of this world global trade.
Often emanating from the United States, as we see, to countries that are smoking more than we are at this point. So let's take a break for a second from showing examples and tell us, in theory, what makes a good infographic? Are there criteria that you look for when choosing the best of the year?
Yeah, so I think a good infographic has the same quality that a good piece of writing has, which is that it's clear. It allows you to see something that you hadn't seen before. And so that's one of the first things I look for. Is there a clear message here? Can I make sense of what they're trying to show me? As for what I'm looking for in this collection, that's a bit of a broader question, because I'm looking for that, but I'm also looking to give readers a sense for the range of work that's being done. So I've included pieces in here that show creativity, not just in the kinds of questions that are being asked, but how people choose to show it. So there's all kinds of just different, it's sort of a very rich media right now where people are doing all sorts of experimentation. So I wanted to give a sense for that. Another thing that I look for is just a sense of challenging, a sense that a reader or viewer seeing something is being given something to grapple with. And that's another quality I really like in these. Or just that they're funny, or that they just engage you in some other emotional way. So there isn't really one particular criteria I use for the infographics, but those are some of the things I'm looking for that I think make a great infographic.
Let's look at an interactive graphic. And this is
Right.
hard to represent in a hardcover book, but of course it works online. Racial diversity in the United States. We're putting this up, and tell us what we're looking at here.
So what you're seeing here is a map of the entire United States. And what they've done is they've put every person where they live, this is from the census, with a colored dot. And the color represents their race. So as you zoom in and move around, you can sort of see the mixing, where people live by race. If you go to the East Coast, or New York, you can see people living in segregated areas. And the thing that's interesting about this and so compelling is the fact that you can zoom in, you can even come down to your own little neighborhood and see it in this, I think, very different way. And I think anyone, there you have in New York, anyone living in New York can immediately see and recognize what those different blocks represent. Another thing that's interesting about this is there's no underlying map. It's literally just all the dots have been put on there. So you can see all these geographic features. You can see Manhattan there. And they just emerge from all these dots that have been placed showing where we are.
Fascinating. Marketers love infographics, right?
Yes, they do. It's sort of, people ask me about this, and I tell them that we're living in a golden age of bad infographics. And I think part of what marketers have discovered is that these infographics are so appealing that they figure if they can turn whatever they want into an infographic, it may get passed around more and get lots of attention. So we're sort of seeing a flood of both really good work and also really bad work at the same time.
So is there a problem with bad infographics? Is there, because of the...
Well, they're annoying.
Yeah, but I mean, is there propaganda being passed around? Is there rhetoric being passed around? Is there, misleading spin being passed around as a result of the ease or the beauty of infographics?
Right. No, Brian, that's a great question. I think that really is true. I mean, there's sort of bad marketing infographics, but also I think the thing to realize is that infographics have become this very powerful media. And with that, I think people have been slow to recognize how much it shapes public opinion. And you have to see, like as we were talking about before with some of those infographics, that there's always an opinion and decisions that go behind a piece of infographic work, the same way that a writer is making choices when they're writing about something. I think that I think one of the best illustrations of this is if you sit on C-SPAN, they talk, but they also now everyone feels like they have to hold up some chart. There's always the assistant there standing, holding the pie chart or whatever. And it's because infographics convey a sense of authority, that this is true information, that this is something that's important, and that air can be used definitely for propaganda purposes. During the debate over healthcare reform, opponents of the president's healthcare reform came up with this infographic, which showed just this massive bureaucratic tangle, showing what the president's proposal would do to the federal government. And it was just this horrifying glimpse of the worst bureaucratic nightmare you can imagine. But that was a very effective piece of propaganda because it sort of convinced you that this is a reform that could never work.
Let's show a couple of infographics that you chose and put in the book that make a point on a particular issue. This is America, the ammo dealer, basically. What are we looking at here, infographic-wise?
So this is a piece from Wired, and the illustrator here was Carl de Torres. And this whole spread is about we've talked a lot about gun control. This is about ammunition control. And the fact that that's another way that we might be able to control the gun violence we have in this country. So what we're looking at right here gives you a really visceral sense for the amount of damage a bullet could do, because these are bullets actual size. And just, I think, looking at that and then knowing that there's millions and millions and millions of these out there gives a sense for why we have such a problem with gun violence in this
10
country.
billion bullets. And I know there are people who say if you want to control gun violence, start with bullets.
Right.
But of course, that's as legislatively hard to do as any other piece of that. So what does this one show in a related fashion? Billions of rounds of ammo produced each year in the US, but this is the flow, right?
So this is the flow, and it's a little reminiscent of the tobacco chart that we were looking at just a little bit earlier. And it shows, I think, how implicated the US is in the production of this ammunition. And it's a reminder that this isn't just a social problem, it's a huge business. And it's a huge international business with people who just make enormous amounts of money in it. And that is something which, of course, shapes the political debate.
And one final one, this is called Fields of Commemoration. Yeah. And we move from individual violence to the field of war with this one.
So this is a really just, I think, beautiful piece of work. When I first saw this, it really took my breath away. And when you see it in print, too, it just has this just this great emotional authority, I think. What it's showing here is all the people that have died in war, and the size of those poppies is showing how many people have died in each of these conflicts. And the distance along the bottom shows how long the conflict has been going on. So it's just, I think it's just a really remarkable way of thinking about what we've lost to organized violence.
Can I say that these are representations of poppies, which historically grew up in the fields where battles of World War I were fought? That's kind of the visual reference here.
Right, Brian. Yeah, I should have explained that. Absolutely. And I think, in fact, and we were just remembering the last war, there was all these porcelain poppies that were put out, I think, around Big Ben in London. I remember seeing pictures of it. It was pretty amazing.
Viewers, you will learn, you will laugh, you will get outraged, you will get enlightened, and lots of other adjectives that I'm not thinking of right now from the best infographics of 2014, compiled by our guest, Gareth Cook. That was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Brian. It was great to be on.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour. Next time, newly digitized ordinances from the 17th century reveal a riotous New York City with so much drunken behavior that maypoles had to be banned. Make of that what you will. And if you're not too hungover, weekday mornings at 10 a.m., tune your radio to WNYC 93.9 FM or AM 820 to hear my radio show. Tomorrow, Reza Aslan on Jesus as a Zealot. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.